Welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast. Whether you're a tech enthusiast or novice, there's something here for everyone. I'm Liz.
And I'm Allie, and together we're your hosts.
Join us as we dive into the world of technology, implementation, and management.
From hearing expert insights to exploring inspiring stories of tech impact, we cover it all.
We'll interview technology users, configurators, and leaders where we discuss driving effective tech adoption in businesses.
Tune in to laugh, learn, and leverage the power of technology. The future is tech-driven. Let's navigate it together. How's your conference going so far?
It's been really good. This is my third DynamicsCon, so watching it grow from like a couple hundred people to like 1,800 this time is amazing. And the community vibe is still there. Like what they do so well, community before everything else has been. The fact that they're keeping it at this level is huge. So yeah, I've heard nothing but positive from everyone I've talked to.
Yeah, I think it makes the days long to like have the events immediately after the sessions.
Yes.
Like immediately, like the sessions end and then you basically go into whatever event is planned, and that's made the days long. But I also kind of love it.
Yeah.
Because it kind of like keeps the momentum going and stuff, and you don't like lose people throughout the day and whatever.
Yeah. I feel like I've been running from thing to thing and I see so many people, and the only chance I get to catch up with them is at the events in the evening. So I love that, because I feel like a lot of conferences, they'll do like a kickoff reception maybe the first night, and then like the other nights it's not, it's like partners or like other people will have events, and then maybe there's like a closing, but there isn't something every night. But I feel like the fact that there is like a publicly available thing every night, so you can catch up with people, and like you're not like, oh, did they make the invite list for that, or is like the flexibility of that is really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it requires less coordination of like, are we going to the same partner party or the same offsite thing tonight? It's
What's happening tonight? What's on the docket?
Big
it's on the back of your badge. Just look.
Just look. Exactly.
Yeah.
Gosh, and I love Liz and Molly too.
Yeah.
They're just like little balls of energy and smiles, and like I think just helping promote everything, trying to talk to everybody, and it's so fun.
It is a wonderful organization. I love working with Doug.
Yeah.
It's good.
They're great people.
Oh yeah, you work for Doug.
Yeah. My boss, so
you have
very
to say
supportive.
that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into it.
All right, start the roast.
You
Or the grilling.
Did you say the roast?
The roast. It was a like food, baking, cooking word. Grill is what I meant.
There you go. Have either of you watched the roast of Tom Brady?
I just watched it. I just saw it last week. Yeah.
I heard about it. I didn't watch.
I have not. I'm usually not a roast person.
No,
I feel bad.
Not either usually, but I did find it entertaining.
Okay.
I really like. I'm just not a comedian person at all, so Tom's always into it.
I was gonna say I'm kind of surprised that. Yeah.
Yeah. Nikki Blazer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she was good.
Yeah.
And then I watched her, whatever her solo thing was. She's funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll check it out. We got some coworkers that are talking about it. One of them, Carrie, is a big Tom Brady fan, and she's like, "I loved it." I'm like, all right, well, maybe we'll check it out.
I mean, I did fall asleep during it.
Okay.
But that's because it was late at night. But
Okay.
I did watch,
That's
75%. It was good.
All right, well, getting on with it. The roast of Anne Krupke.
Oh God.
Just kidding.
New series.
Oh no.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of Dynamics Hot Dish. We are recording this one live at DynamicsCon Live in Denver, Colorado here. We have a special guest with us today, Ms. Anne Krupke, and she's going to be talking with us. Anne, could you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell our listeners what you do.
Sure. So Anne Krupke here. I am a senior product marketing manager at Microsoft, which is like, I don't know, it's an interesting title. So basically I work on the ERP marketing team, and I look after Dynamics 365 supply chain and commerce product marketing. But I've been in that role for just over 7 months now or so. I started my career in the partner channel for Dynamics at ERP always. I'm an industrial engineer by trade, so manufacturing is like my space, my happy place. So I started in the partner channel as a delivery consultant, and then I moved over into pre-sales, and then I moved into engagement management. So I was helping manage projects, and then I went to Microsoft in 2021 as a fast track solution architect. And I was there for 2 years and just recently switched into product marketing. So been kind of everywhere except maybe an ISV in the industry.
Yeah, it sounds like you have some good experience. So what do you do as a product market? Wait, was it
Product marketing manager.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, it's a lot of words. I feel like every new title I get gets longer and longer. So basically, I work with a lot of our internal stakeholders to help market and sell our products. So from working with analyst firms like Gartner and IDC on the Magic Quadrants, and just on our general getting information from them about how the overall ERP market is changing and what customers need that we may not be seeing, in our own limited view. So analyst work is a piece of it. I work with the product team as they build new features to help create, the materials that we're going to use to announce the launches and plan all that kind of big moments that happen when we launch new features. And then I also work with our field, so our technical sellers and our solution specialists, helping them understand what we're bringing to market so we can effectively present new features and sell them to our customers. So I just did it with Supply Chain Management Premium is a new license we announced for Dynamics 365. And so one of the things that I did was put together some presentations and do some educational calls to explain this is what's in the base supply chain management license, and here's what is in premium, and here's how you can explain the features and how do you help customers figure out what they need. But the most important thing is actually I help name features. It's not the most important, but it is
That's so
crazy.
cool.
It was a nuance I hadn't even thought of until I got to marketing, and they were like, yeah, can you just put together a naming brief on this feature that's coming? And I was like, the amount of work that goes into naming stuff at Microsoft, there's a naming council. So I, as the product marketing manager for a feature, will build a brief where I'll do some competitive analysis. We'll do other similar solutions called that feature. What are some possible names? What are the pros and cons? I'll talk to the PMs and say, is this, actually one of the questions I think you want to ask me about, is this a product? Is this an app? Is this an add-in? So there's all these different levels in the marketing world of like what a feature is. And then that determines how it gets named. So it's this crazy process.
So you only name features, you don't name the products or apps or add-ins or any of the other classifications or tiers of things?
So technically, I guess if it fell in my umbrella, I would name any of them.
Okay.
So if we were going to launch a new ERP app, and it was in a project that I was working on, then actually I could be involved in that. So my predecessors are responsible for taking finance and operations and splitting it into finance, supply chain management, human resources, commerce, and project operations. So, which actually leads into this whole like, what is an app? What is F&O? And I actually think it's a thing that a lot of our community just calls the whole ERP. It's our SMC and enterprise level ERP, not to be confused with Business Central. Everyone still really refers to it as F&O or finance and operations.
Yeah. It's just easier to say.
So much easier to say.
In a conversation. Like, you're not going to list all those apps off.
I don't disagree with you. I think, and it's reflective of the approach that we've taken in terms of our development and our marketing strategy, and even the way people adopt it. Because we have something in all of the ERP, we have something like 30 modules. So you can't go from we have an ERP to here's 30 modules. I actually did it in one of my sessions this week. I put all the modules on one screen, and the words were so tiny, even on a projector screen, that it was like really hard to read. So you have to kind of summarize the workloads that belong in an ERP, which is where the apps come in. So technically speaking, the Dynamics ERP portfolio contains 5 apps, which are finance, supply chain management, not supply chain, but supply chain management, not for you guys, but for the general world. People love to drop the management off. Commerce, human resources, and project operations. So those are the apps that make up our, SMC enterprise ERP portfolio.
So when people want to implement this, you said F&O, right? We still refer to it as F&O, finance and operations. It covers all of those.
Yep.
Originally, was it called F&O because like everybody would implement all of those different apps, and now people can buy standalone, or like why were they separated?
So I think some of it has to do with licensing. Again, I wasn't on the team that made the decision at the time, but it was kind of having a single license for all the users of one of the ERP was a bit confusing to our customers, to my knowledge. And so being able to say you're a finance user, that's your department that you're in, you're a supply chain user. So it's all a single code base. So it's natively integrated. It works without having to enable anything even like dual write. Like it is a true single code base. And it doesn't even appear as multiple interfaces. You log into one interface. It's just security roles determine which apps you use. But from explaining what the capabilities were and the full context of what we offer in the F&O stack, I think that was part of the driver for the decision to kind of break it into apps, and each app gets a license. So you buy a finance license and you can buy a supply chain license. For 2 users in the same company can have a different license. So I've seen some people just implement Dynamics for financials, or you might implement it if you're a service-centric organization who doesn't have inventory, then you might not need the supply chain management modules. So you can just implement finance, you can just implement supply chain management, but I'll say that the biggest use case is typically the full ERP is why people buy our product. And then sometimes the ones like commerce, human resources, and project operations are more of a, if you need it, bring it in, but not always.
Gotcha. So that's why we kind of went from F&O to like F&SCM, right?
Right, because those are the two kind of most used areas of the application. So that's why people generally call it F&SCM.
Well, I feel like Project Ops until recently was technically part of CRM, and then now it's moved to the ERP side of things.
So so that's actually, it's not exactly how. So F&O has a module called Project Management and Accounting, and has since the on-premise days. So there has always been this capability of having projects, whether they're connected to manufacturing or whether they're just service-based projects or internal capital projects. So a work breakdown structure, resources, expenses, time control, all of that has always existed in Dynamics. And then project operations is the Dataverse-based piece of that. And based on my understanding, so I'm not an expert in project ops, but based on my understanding, where we're at is project operations now refers to both the PMA module and the Dataverse capabilities of project operations, and it's more referred to as the different deployment scenarios. So projects, non-stocked projects, so service projects, are pretty much fully deployed on project operations, the Dataverse app, and then stocked projects, that deployment scenario is typically more on the project management and accounting module within the F&O code base. And then there are people who use kind of both across, and I know there are some partners in the industry who are really skilled at kind of stitching together the best solution for those customers.
What's an example of a customer that would use a non-stock solution?
So if you're doing, maybe you're doing consulting services, right? So you need to plan your project with milestones and timelines. You need to book resources against it, but you're not consuming inventory. So you're not building something as a project. Whereas projects for stock scenarios are used more often in an engineer to order type of situation. So like a construction project, we are going to build a house, and we need drywall, and we need concrete, and we need wood, and we need all these materials. And then we also need people who are going to do work, and those people have certifications and skills and availability. So to do both the inventory management aspect of projects as well as the human management, that's kind of the stocked scenario. And then if there's no inventory involved, like a professional services or even like your plumber, right? If you're running a plumbing business, then you might not really do much in terms of like the parts management, because it's more tools than it is parts. If you're doing a complex plumbing project, I guess you might use maybe field service. So less experience with non-stock, more experience with stocked, but it's really whether there's inventory or whether you're manufacturing something as part of the project.
Okay. And then so with all the, so just circling back to, so we call them apps. So finance is an app, supply chain is an app. They're all apps that make up the ERP
From
platform.
a marketing perspective, yes.
Okay. All right. I'm just thinking about calling, what we ought to call them too.
Supply chain management, not supply chain.
Supply chain management.
So if you think about like the CE portfolio. Sales is an app,
Yes.
field service is an app, customer service is an app. In the same way, they're on the same platform, right? And they are natively integrated on Dataverse, correct? Am I on that? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's the same way. It just, the user interface isn't quite the same. We don't differentiate in the UI which app you're in F&O. But from a marketing perspective, it is the equivalent of sales, field service, customer service.
In a licensing perspective, then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Exactly. So we've got a more unified model across all of biz apps now, which is another benefit.
So then taking it one step further too, there's all these apps that make up finance and operations or finance and supply chain management. Business Central is still just Business Central. So kind of what are some highlight differences between the larger ERP and then Business Central?
It's a good question. So, and it is one of the most common questions I get at events like DynamicsCon.
Yeah, which one should I go to?
Yeah. So it used to be a lot more clear cut, especially Business Central used to have a hard user limit of no more than 300 users.
Oh.
Because so Business Central is a small to medium business ERP. We had a legacy on-premise ERP called Nav that then, when it moved to the cloud, became Business Central, and our legacy on-premise called AX is what became F&O. And F&O is more for small to medium corporations, and then enterprise businesses. So scale used to be the easiest way, just how many users fits you in. And then some partners will take revenue into account, so maybe around the 300 million mark. If you're under that, you might look at BC first. But it's gotten a bit more complex. So there are a large number of ISVs in the BC community who help take kind of the simplified, geared towards smaller businesses solution and then add on like industry specific capabilities. Whereas with finance and supply chain management, you may get more capabilities out of the box, like advanced warehouse management through the mobile app, or transportation management, serial and lot tracking. So the more kind of complex your processes are or your requirements are, the more likely you are to look at finance and supply chain management. And then too, you might want to think about your growth of, maybe I have fewer than 300 users right now, but in 2 years, am I going to acquire more companies? Am I going to do more of a complex global growth strategy, in which case you might look more at the finance and operations stack. So it's become more nuanced, and that I was just having this conversation today with someone. I kind of recommended, if you really feel stuck between the two and you don't know a clear way, find a partner who does both. There are many in the channel. And you can even do like a proof of concept or an assessment and say, these are our high level requirements, assess them for finance and operations, assess them for Business Central, and then make a customized recommendation for the business is kind of the point where we've ended up at.
So it sounds like some analysis is needed if someone's on the fence, and it's not as easy as saying this is a revenue threshold or a user count threshold these days. That it's more about the complexity of process and the requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I think that anybody should do due diligence when picking an ERP anyway, because it is a very expensive thing to implement.
Yeah.
So if there is any doubt, then you should take the time to make the right decision. And honestly, the way ERP implementations normally go, they can be, multiple millions of dollars, anywhere from, I think I've seen, a few $100,000 to $10+ million, depending on the size of the company. And in a lot of my experiences, we would actually break the statement of work into two pieces. You would do an initial statement of work just for analysis, because whatever kind of estimate you've had for the actual design and develop phase, you'd end up doing a change order anyway when you finish analysis. So sometimes companies who want to be a bit more kind of know what they're getting into, they'll just do analysis, and then at the end of analysis, they'll write a whole new statement of work to cover the rest of the project. Whereas some, you just do one for the whole thing, and then you do a change order if you learn something in analysis that you didn't find during the pre-sales process.
How many large ERP implementations like that do you feel like are similar versus like really customized to businesses' processes? And the reason I'm asking this is because Liz and I come from a CRM Power Platform space, and it's like we can customize anything, right? And like we know it's a little bit trickier, requires a developer a lot of the time to do it in these ERP systems.
Yeah.
And we hear a lot too of like, well, it's just kind of making sure that we're giving the right processes to the business, not necessarily customizing those processes. Is that kind of
Yeah, so it actually took me a while to really understand the core differences between CRM and ERP in terms of the way the products are designed. So um, CRM is so flexible. You're like, what fields do you want on this record, right? You just, okay, let me just put them in. You want that to be a string, you want that to be a Boolean, right?
Yeah.
It's like low code, really. And then for ERP, the way that it works is we have multiple levels. We have configuration. So for every module, take, for example, production, right? Production management or manufacturing operations. There are all of these toggles, more or less, or there are places where you could say we have production groups or production units, and we just, in the back end, there's a form and you just add all the different options for what should be available in that drop down. But then you come up with more things like that are yes, no flags or multiple options from a preset list. So there's a lot of this. These are the options, pick from the preset list. And if you don't like the combinations of the options, either yes, no, or from the preset list, then you need to go to custom code to develop a solution or Power Platform to bring something in. So that is where this fit gap or customization conversation becomes so more extensive, because it's really, well, are we asking for this to behave this specific way because that's how we've always done it? Or could we change our process so that it fits into one of these preset options? I would say there's still dozens of ways you can configure any particular module, but it's finite because we have yes, no's, and we have drop downs with options versus CRM, which I think is there's infinite ways you can run your process. But I will also say it's a bit more necessary for ERP because it's so heavily reliant on the financial backbone of a company. It needs to be traceable, auditable, explainable, right? GAAP compliance is a big thing for our customers. So it's a very dense product, and it does make sense to have kind of the rigidity and the structure in the way we do it, just so you can have that traceability and compliance and control over the business process. But it does mean customizing is a bit more of an effort and something to be considered. Why are you doing that?
Yeah, I think the why is huge in this too. And I learned over the past year and a half or so what data effective tables are. That was a new one for me too, because they're all in the finance and operations system of using data effectiveness and how contracts and things like that are going to be data effective tables. And because we don't really have that in CE, right? It's pretty much just you change the record, we can add to the audit history if you want to see it, and if not. But then there's certain things that have to be data effective. So
like
kind of
pricing, right? So this is my current price list, and every January I refresh it. So, and I'm not going to go in on January 1st and put in 1,000 new prices for my products, right? So I just want to have before that uploaded a full list that says this becomes effective on January 1st. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I feel like F&O calls customizations or configurations, are more like settings in my mind in our world, and then customization is code for both of us. Yeah, but it makes sense. There's no regulation or compliance or anything like that managing how do you run your marketing, customer service, sales team. It's really just completely up to the business. So it's so open-ended, so flexible, that I think just the way you approach the project and the processes, that just makes it different right from the start. Yeah. And I've always love to hear both of your opinions on this, but how do you deploy CRM and ERP at the same time? Yeah. Should you deploy them at the same time? Should they be phased approaches? Because I feel like the approach tends to be different because of that. Yeah. And they are in two different databases too. They're not both in the Dataverse yet.
So I would actually say that if you're doing Dynamics for both CRM and ERP, you should at least do the analysis at the same time and the high-level design. And you cannot do that without an enterprise architect who understands how both products work. So I'll say, on the F&O side, I've had projects where I came in to customers who already had a CRM implementation, who had made decisions about things like the account record or what record they used for customers, what table, that didn't align with maybe the standard dual right maps to get that information. So we've actually had to, in some projects, rip out old CRM implementations and update them so that they could actually integrate. And then you have to make so many master data management decisions who owns the customer master? And that's going to be different from company to company. There is no right answer, but you need to answer the question.
Yep.
All that sort of information. So I would say the design and analysis phases really should be both as much as possible. I get that it's not always possible for everybody, but if you're in an ideal world, I think you need to do them together to be conscious of how best to marry them into a full solution.
Absolutely. And I agree with you. And to kind of identify your crossover points, I think is the biggest thing, right?
Yeah.
What do we want to integrate? What is important? And then everybody has opinions on where the master data should lie.
Right.
And I think it's important to align internally as well on those types of decisions, because like just because sales wants to own their accounts doesn't mean they should. Right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like looking at the data that goes onto them, and like maybe it's a double effort. I've had that come up with like customers and accounts is like, sure, accounting owns it and so does sales.
Right.
How does that work? Well, they each own different data points on it.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of like making those decisions.
Yeah. So the two things that I think are really important for projects that are going to span across both is master data management. So have a team of people dedicated, or not necessarily full-time dedicated, but have people who have in their charters ownership of master data management, building libraries saying this is all of the different things we track about a customer. And these are the systems that are the master systems. And this is the team that owns the definition of this type of data, right? These are all the stakeholders. And when we make a change, these are the people who need to approve it. Kind of putting a structure in around the data that sits across your enterprise application portfolio. And then I also think that business process mapping from the front end, I mean, you guys know I'm nuts about business processes, but
it's important.
It is. And
they're kind of fun.
They're really fun. I love doing it. I like figuring out the visual and then seeing, what you missed. It's so much better at being able to identify, when I was in my consulting era, it's Taylor Swift. I was in my consulting era. When I was doing consulting, it would help me figure out what I had missed, because they could actually go, yeah, this and then this and then this. Wait a second, we do this whole thing and you didn't catch that. So and then when you're bringing CRM stakeholders and ERP stakeholders into the same room and making them map a full process end to end, then things become a lot clearer about how you should move forward. And you can identify, like you said, duplication or opportunities for automation or integration, and all of these, the picture becomes so much clearer, and you can get some change management in there and show people what the future can look like when you have it all together.
Or in the CRM world, maybe there's not a process.
Yeah.
Like we just don't have a standard sales process. And then it's like, well, how do we build a system to that?
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think that really happens as much in ERP. I hope not.
It depends on the area. There are some things that are a bit more like on legacy systems. So the interesting thing about ERP, and I don't know if it's like this in CRM, but what I've seen a lot, so we're still doing the cloud migration is a lot of it. Mm-hmm. And especially manufacturing, which is the industry I have the most depth in. You have a lot of manufacturers who are running on a system that is 30 plus years old, and they have code customized for 30 years, ongoing, right? It's actually a thing I have met. I've gone to companies where the ERP is named after the prime developer. Like that is how they refer.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it's this very they start with a system that is, one way, and then they evolve it with their business, and it becomes this really bespoke kind of unique thing that is not necessarily going to map at all to a modern ERP, because they have just said, well, we do it like that. Let's make the ERP work like that. So maybe not so much there's no process at all, except maybe in the case of like supply planning is a place where people do a lot of paper and spreadsheets. But it's a lot of, we have spent 30 years making this ERP follow our processes the way we already do them. And now it's time to think about bringing our processes into the current time instead of 30 years ago.
For sure. And I think what's really fun about business process mapping too is when you start to map out the whole thing and you have people in a room and they start going, oh, Liz, I had no idea you were doing that as part of it too. And why are you doing that? You don't need to do that because I do this. And it's like, thank you. This is why I'm bringing you all together here today.
Maybe we don't even need a new system and we just need to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I think too, like it's fun when you do it with like on the whiteboard with Post-it notes and you move stuff around. And then like when you bring, because I've also seen times, so in ERP, probably for CRM too, but one of the times people pick a new ERP is when you have businesses merging or one business acquires another business. And so you have people who are in the same industry, because that's why they merged or acquired, who have two completely different legacy systems and two completely different processes and sometimes even different business models. And then you bring them into the same room and you say, all right, what's the process going to be going forward? And what do you guys do today? And that is such an interesting experience to really understand, well, we do it this way. Well, how come? And we do it this way. Okay, how come? And what's the right way going forward? And then also, how do you get them to agree on the
that
right
can
way?
take time. People can get really hung up on that agreement point.
Especially in times of like acquisitions, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Because there can be some animosity there.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if it's not a merger, actually, but an acquisition, right? And I think that is actually one of the reasons ERP transformation takes so long is because stakeholder management is critical. And getting the requirements correct is right. So, I think normally I think CRM implementations are a bit more agile run.
Yeah.
Whereas ERP is more traditionally waterfall, although a lot of partners have adopted agile practices. But you spend all the time up front gathering requirements, going through them, making sure that you got the wording right, all the details, and then you get them signed off all at once by your SMEs and business process owners. And then you go in and you start doing configuration to map to each of the requirements. And that is getting approval. It's a very iterative process. You configure and then you demo and they go, that is not at all what I wanted that to be. And then you go back and you change it and then you demo, and it's important. And then you put this kind of these requirements together into a solution and bring it into a CRP. And then the business who's not been involved, like the non-SME parts of the business go, that's not going to work, right? And then you start all over. So, but it's important because if you want to be able to go live and not have it be a disaster, you need the whole business on board for the change you're making.
Yeah, not just a couple people making decisions for the whole thing.
Yeah, that goes really well.
You threw out a lot of acronyms there. CRP, do you want to define that for our listeners?
Sure, that's conference room pilot. So it refers to typically maybe a week-long event, also sometimes called a simulation or a sim, where you get the project team in a room with non-project team stakeholders and you demo to them the solution in its current state for feedback and validation and kind of approval to go forward, especially because ERP projects can take years. Imagine building a solution for 2 years and then only then showing it to the rest of the business, right? That would never work. So we build in these conference room pilot points where we show them, and then ultimately you have the business take over more and more of the showing part and have the partner take on less and less so that they can fully gain ownership of the solution they're presenting.
Which is great. And we do those for CRM stuff too. You hit milestones and you want to get them hands in if you can. And if you can't, then at least have somebody demo it and like show whatever you've built so far to make sure they're all on board. Because like you said, you don't want to get to the end and him be like, this thing you did 8 months ago isn't going to work for us.
I think we've all seen that happen before.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh,
yeah. There's nothing worse than getting to end user training when the end users were like, that's not our process. We don't need it that way. Okay, let's start over.
There was one project where they got to go live. They were live, and then they were like, hey guys, did you know we actually do this like additional process? And they were like, nobody ever told in the entire project, nobody ever said they had, it was like an additional order channel that they had for order to cash without giving too many details. But like you can sell, through the phone and you can sell through email or EDI or like whatever. And there was like a whole way that they sell to customers that they had left out in requirements gathering. And they got to go live and they were like, hey, how are we supposed to do those orders? So yeah, it still happens, but you just adjust and, pivot.
Pivot. And I think going back to like the multi-workload question too, implementing CRMs and ERPs at the same time, like process mapping is really important there as well, because I've been on projects before where like the finance group will be doing their process and they'll say, oh yeah, we get the contract from sales, we enter it here, and then that's their whole process map. I'm like, well, what did sales do to get that contract? Yeah. And so I think it's super important to look at, whether it's CRM as your front end, which usually processes start in CRM systems, right? It's the salespeople getting the leads, qualifying the leads, creating the quotes, everything there before it goes into the ERP system. And
Mhm.
so often that's all forgotten when we're doing ERP system process
Yeah.
mapping.
Totally. I think it's one of the most interesting areas to me is forecasting, because sales forecasting is a thing, and you guys have features for that on the CRM side, or we have features for that on the CRM side. And then operations forecasting is almost an entirely different thing, but it really shouldn't be. So I've actually had these conversations with some of my CRM counterparts in the past, and it's this like, sales is sometimes it's about like what you want to achieve or what you want to sell or what you think you can sell. And then operations is like, what do I think is actually going to happen so I can have the materials on hand, so I can have the right staff in my operations, like what is actually going to happen, and what do I need to do to make sure that when it does happen, I can fulfill my orders actually, right? So I think that with the continued kind of convergence of CRM and ERP on the platform, having that cohesive consensus plan, consensus forecast is going to be interesting to see how many people do that well.
So here's a question, because this is a great segue into my question about demand planning.
Yeah.
So thinking about demand planning, I know that you had mentioned the supply chain premium licensing that came out April 1st, right? Yep. And then as part of that, I noticed in a few environments that I work in that this demand planning model-driven app just randomly showed up one day, and it changed all of my themes, and I was wondering what was going on. And there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in our CE environments, right? Because it's a model-driven app.
Yeah.
And so what is, and I think demand planning is kind of tying into what you were talking about, the forecasting and stuff as well.
Yes.
So kind of what's the vision of taking demand planning, which is very much, historically ERP, and then making that into a model-driven app?
So the way that a lot of the F&O stack development has gone in the past, 3 or 4 years, especially since I've been at Microsoft, I've noticed that is actually a lot of our solutions are being built on model-driven apps. So IOM is based on Dataverse, Intelligent Order Management, which is an order orchestration tool. Like you guys go out and win the orders, and then we have to figure out, which warehouse will ship the order from.
Cool.
So IOM does that. We have an inventory visibility service that lets you see real-time on-hand inventory across all of your systems. That's based on Dataverse. So a lot of the development that the team has done is actually based on Dataverse because there's some really good things to be had there. And when it makes sense, we can deploy those solutions on Dataverse to have native integrations with Dynamics. So in the demand planning sense, that's part of the supply chain management app. It's basically because it's a complete process of generating a statistical forecast, reviewing and collaborating with your stakeholders, whether they're in sales, marketing, operations, and then firming the forecast. Because it's kind of a complete process, it can be done on a model-driven app, which has a more modern user interface,
for sure,
right? And some capabilities to connect with Copilot easier than the F&O platform. So it lets them kind of get the best out of building on Dataverse, and then it has a native integration with the F&O platform for supply chain management. So you bring in your actual demand history, so sales orders or production consumption, you bring that in, you run your statistical forecast based on historical demand, and then when you finalize the future-looking plan, you publish that back to supply chain. But because it's built on Dataverse, we also have a lot of flexibility, and you can actually use Power Query to connect to any system. So you can export to sales if you wanted to, or just put it into sales, or bring data from CRM into the forecast. So it actually does kind of, I think, open the door. I don't know that it was specifically intentional, but just like the general trend of when we build new kind of modules is probably a way to think about it. When we built like a complete new area that we're covering with the ERP versus individual features that add on existing things we have will normally stay in X++, which is what F&O is based on. But if we're building a completely new kind of area of the product, then we'll take advantage of the benefits of Dataverse.
That's really cool. It's cool to see the platforms coming together more.
Yeah.
It definitely causes some confusion from people who are used to working in silos.
Yeah.
Right? Of like, I do my development this way. Now we have to learn the Maker Portal. We have to learn the Admin Center. It's like a whole new way of configuring, right?
Yeah. So actually what has happened for us is that LCS is our version of Power Platform Admin Center. It stands for Lifecycle Services, and that's how you've always done environment management and code deployment and all of that. And it has been scheduled for deprecation, and we're migrating all of that experience to the Power Platform Admin Center. So this is part of our One Dynamics, One Platform initiative. And there was actually just a session today on that as well, which was cool. And so the goal is actually for one admin experience for Dynamics customers, whatever apps they use, which I think is awesome. It's just there's a lot of having to converge. LCS had some features that Power Platform Admin Center didn't have. And there are a lot of benefits Power Platform Admin Center has that LCS didn't have, like being able to copy environments really easily and take the configurations and not the data. So keeping the environment size small, but still being able to troubleshoot things. Like a lot of those sides of things look really nice on that side. And then LCS has had some things that are being now built into Power Platform Admin Center, so you could kind of have the best of both worlds.
Do you know what the timeline is for LCS being deprecated?
Not off the top of my head. Right now, I think we're in like opt-in to use Power Platform Admin Center. So it was kind of like, if you want to use that instead of LCS right now for finance operations apps, you can. I don't remember exactly, and everything is subject to change. Like I am a Microsoft employee, but I only operate off the information that I know, and I'm not, making an official statement. I'm in marketing now, so I have to qualify everything. Right?
Understand.
But so my understanding is like in the next year or two-ish, assuming things go according to schedule.
Which is quick. That's pretty quick.
It'll probably be a slow. I mean,
I would always think it's probably longer than we think it is, right? But it's not. It is like we have not announced anything yet in terms of like pushing it. But the next step would be Power Platform by default, and then opt out. So right now it's opt in, and then we'll move to opt out, and then it will be mandatory. So the point where we get to where you're not allowed to use LCS at all is, I think, very far in the future, or medium far in the future, depending on how you want to look at it.
I mean, they haven't taken away our old settings area yet, and of when that's been since 2017.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
That we've been transitioning to the Maker Portal or Power Platform Admin Center. So.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
that's a long time.
Yeah, I think that.
So there's time.
Yeah, there's no need to panic is kind of how I feel about it. I really do think that they're being intentional about saying we're not going to ask customers to really give up LCS until we can provide a full solution for them. So it's an ongoing effort, but it won't be rushed.
Well, and I think this is a good example too of collaborating, because I've been working on a lot of multi-workload projects, F&O or F&SCM and CE. And in that, like, I'm having to go into LCS, right? And there's some points in there where we have to collaborate on like deploying a finance environment with a Power Platform environment and making those connections. And we're having to collaborate on like which environment we're connecting to. And is it a dev box? Is it a sandbox? Like, what are we doing?
Right.
And so again, like thinking about what you're saying about the model-driven apps coming up too, like it just is unifying the people who are doing the work. And I think for that reason alone, it's nice because now we're all going to have that same experience.
Definitely. I think it's great. Once we can get it all fleshed out, it'll be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about like the multi-workload stuff a little bit in here as well, what has been your experience using dual write and leveraging dual write, or do you know kind of the future of dual write?
Dual write is currently the standard. You can use things like logic apps or custom integrations, and I've seen people do that. Dual write is like the fast track answer is dual write is the recommended solution at the moment. There is no public plan for that to be replaced at the moment.
I mean, it's kind of new, sort of.
Is it? I guess I'm not. Okay, yeah, it's a few years old. I would say there's still. You need to be there's actually a lot of fast track guidance out about dual write. So anybody who's looking at doing the multi-platform with dual write, I definitely recommend you take a look at there's tech talks, there's documentation. And it is an area that's still getting development. For example, the field service team just released new dual write maps for taking field service project and bringing it back into projects, the project management and accounting module on the F&O side. So you can do like billing really more streamlined based on your service contracts that you have. So dual write is the way to integrate the first party solutions with the most seamless experience with the templates. That being said, from what I saw on the fast track side, there aren't standard templates for everything, so you may need to do custom. And then if you want to use dual write, you need to be very aware of the design to make sure that it is compatible with dual write. And then you need to make sure you do extensive performance testing, that you're thinking about when does data really need to be synced real time between the two systems? When can it be done asynchronously and during non-peak hours, and what's the volume going to be? So you have to think really critically about it, because it is, for some people, it's a really critical integration point. So like we have plenty of customers who use it who are live on dual write, and I think it's just about making sure you do it right up front versus hamstringing your business post go live.
And, just like any integration, like I like using dual write. I'll be honest. I think it's nice. I think it works well. I think you have to do a whole lot of testing, and you have to treat it as if you're building an integration from scratch is the best way I can look at it. So like, yeah, even though there's a bunch of stuff pre-mapped out in there for you and there's integration keys and it looks good, still treat it as if there's no foundation.
Yeah.
And like do your data mapping as you usually would, time everything out, right? If you want it bi-directional, unidirectional, kind of what you want, and start from scratch in that way. And then, you can use your templates and tweak it. But I think that's the best way to look at it. And
I like that. That sounds really good. That sounds like a good way to approach it. I haven't done that many dual write projects myself. I just get the kind of piecemeal feedback from people. Dual write is like the conversational stopper. Like if you want to walk into a room and ruin the energy on the F&O side, you just walk in and say dual write, and all of a sudden everyone goes, why would you bring that up? But I don't know. I think like to your point, it's not really that different from any other integration. It's probably like slightly better because it's an out of the box tool, right? But if you approach it with the right expectation, then I don't think it's as painful as it may seem.
And the other benefit is it comes with a lot of, like, the error occurs immediately. So you get a user-facing error if something happens right away.
Yeah.
You don't really have to worry about like error logging and system admins looking in the back end at errors or anything like that. It's in your face. Sure, the error messages might be long and they don't really make sense, but like you can find someone who understands them.
Yeah.
And sometimes they are really helpful, and it just is a couple keywords in there that you can pick out and you know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think those user-facing errors right away of like, oh, okay, this isn't going to sync and it's telling me this immediately.
Yeah.
Right? Then you don't have to worry about stuff just hanging out there that hopefully integrates when the error is resolved.
That is great. I actually so the session I was in before I just came here was a customer talking about their implementation story, and they were talking about integrations, and they said that what they had done was actually they set it up so that when there was an integration error, user error like that, and if they knew if they knew what the error meant, they would drop it in Teams channels, to that team of people. Like if it was a data is missing error or address is invalid or whatever, they would drop it in the chat channel to the people who can fix it. So they were actually, I thought that was really smart. Like I've been on a lot of projects and we've done a lot with error handling, but I feel like actually redirecting data issues back to the people who own the data versus pushing it to IT first. I was like so impressed that they thought of that.
Yeah, and like one error that comes up for one of my clients a lot is that the product isn't active in CE.
Okay.
And that's a data thing. So sometimes it'll come across my plate and I'm just like, you guys need to just publish this.
Yeah, so you should hard code when that error happens, push it to this Teams channel or something, or send this person an email to fix it. Or even, I guess at that point you could say, why are they getting to that point in the process without having made the product active, and how do you make that a step that they must do before they
causing other problems.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. That's smart. I like that a lot. Going back to the demand planning app too, and you were talking about all these model-driven apps that are being created.
Yeah.
How are they integrated back to finance and operations? Is it dual write stuff, or is it hard coded?
It depends. Some of the model-driven apps. So like an example would be the asset management mobile app. So asset management is our maintenance capability. So if you're running production facility and you have all these machines, often you have a maintenance department who works and does the maintenance on your machines. And when you need to call a vendor to do maintenance, that would be more of the vendor might run field service. But if we're talking maintaining your own machines, then we're looking at asset management. And we have, the back office, here's my full list of assets and my maintenance schedules and all that stuff. But when we have a mobile app, which is a power app, that you can take out on the floor and like see what's assigned to you and like record the time and materials used to do maintenance. That has, I think it's virtual entities actually. I don't think it's dual write. I think it's virtual entities, because that lets you pull the real-time information on like what are the work orders, who are they assigned to, and like manage all of that. And then in the case of demand planning, it is actually a Power Query integration with supply chain management. So you set up a job either on a schedule or you run it manually and you say, this is the data. And that's nice because it maps to the data entity framework in supply chain management or in the F&O platform. I don't know if you're familiar with like the DMF framework, data management framework.
I've heard the term. That's about it.
So I guess for maybe people who aren't familiar with that, ERP, because it covers such a breadth of business processes, there are so many tables, like so many tables. And even a vendor might have so many tables related to a vendor. Like you've got the core record, you've got their addresses, you've got their contacts, you've got their bank information. Like you have all of these different tables of data that contain related to a vendor. So when we went to the cloud, the team they engineered it so that they created data entities which pull together multiple tables of related data into a single like entity, so that you can import or export data very simply with the entity you're looking for, instead of having to map to every single table that has related information to the topic. So instead of doing 5 tables for vendors, there's a single vendor master entity that you can use for data migration from a legacy system, or you can use it for integrations to other systems. So the way that demand planning works is you point it at the right data entity that you want it to pull data from or push data to, and then you can even like control the field mapping. Because for demand planning is a little bit different because you need to choose how you want to bring it in. So if you're doing a demand forecast based on historical data, one of the data points is, when was that demand? When did it happen? And in our sales orders, there are multiple fields that could be. There could be the requested receipt date, so the date they actually wanted the product, or there could be the actual receipt date, so the date they actually got the product. What do you want to use to feed your forecast model? And then there's things like, what dimensions do you want to bring in, like customer channels. So because there's so much nuance, they built it so that you choose the mapping between the data entities to bring it through. And I do believe it's a Power Query integration.
Okay.
And then, but other ones use things like virtual entities. I don't know off the top of my head that any of them actually do use dual write. I think it's because it's part of the same app from a marketing perspective, like that we sell. The goal is to make the experience as seamless as possible.
Yeah, which makes sense. I was just kind of thinking, like, if we're going to be seeing this information in a Dataverse environment, are we going to be able to customize it potentially? Right, like if people can go into Power Apps and customize it, and then they want to customize the integration.
So I would think of it like a managed solution. So that it's there. I remember when we released the asset management mobile app, that one was basically like locked down. So you could install it and you can use it, but you couldn't customize it at all.
Okay.
And I thought that at the time, and that was in 2022, or was it last year? Might have been early last year that we released it, but at the time there was a platform constraint that when we build the solution and publish it to customer environments, or let you publish it to your environment, when we do that, there was a platform constraint around being able to let them then open it up and change certain things about it. So it was use it as is or not at all. But I don't know if they've gotten over that, but I know it was on the roadmap when we released the solution. So yeah, I would just think about it like it's a solution we build and maintain, like we maintain our core code.
Yeah.
So when we publish those solutions, they're still controlled and owned by Microsoft. So I think either you can't customize them at all, or there's a very controlled way that you're allowed to customize them.
Got it. Okay. And honestly, that makes me feel a little bit better about seeing them in our Dataverse environments too.
Yeah.
Because at first I was like, oh no, are all these F&O developers going to have to learn how to customize in Power Apps Maker Portal? And like, but it doesn't sound like they're going to have the ability to do that. At least not right away.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
And I think, it's such an interesting evolution, because I do think that the framework with Dataverse brings so many benefits, but we are introducing a lot more complexity into our developer experiences, because X++ code is a completely separate thing, right? And we do keep building features on X++ where it makes sense. Like we just added a new feature for like linking batch and serial number components to the finished projects that they go into. And that is embedded within our core manufacturing process, which is all on X++. So naturally, that feature is part of X++. It lives within the product. So we will continue to do that where it makes sense. But they're like, yeah, so it is going to be interesting to see how it evolves and how the developer experience evolves. And maybe we'll even see more specialization among developers. But
Yeah.
I would say 95% of ERP is still on X++. So
Okay.
it's pretty limited still what we have on Dataverse.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also want to backtrack 1 second too.
Yeah, no worries.
So when she was describing before how they have like the tables and the entities mapped together, this was something I learned this year, was that tables and entities are two different things in finance and
Oh,
operations.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whereas like for us, we used to have
It's an old word and a new word.
entities, and now they're called tables. So it's just the
Oh,
old
okay.
word and the new word.
Yeah.
And I learned this from doing dual right work. And I was like, oh, this is very interesting because
Yeah.
it's the same thing to me. But it's the data entities that we integrate with for dual right. And so you can build a data entity to like pull data from all these different places, and then you use that data entity in dual right, but then we use the F&O entity to connect with our Dataverse table.
Okay.
So it's like, it's funny because it's like
That was a
different
lot of
language.
technical
The
language.
terminology
Yes.
overlap, but like with different meanings. It's
Yeah.
It's talking like for me to try to work with my F&O developer. He's like, well, yeah, we'll just do, the table and the entity. And I was like, well, isn't that the same thing? And he was
Right.
like, no. I'm like, okay, cool. Glad we talked
Yeah.
about
like in
this.
my world it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we need like CRM for dummies and ERP for dummies and like cross educate. I do actually think that like enterprise architects aren't a standard. Like in my experience, it's normally either it depends on who's kind of the primary in the cross workload. Like if the CRM is the North Star, or like the part that the company kind of cares more about, like let's be real, there's a favorite child, right? So if the CRM team is kind of leading, or if the ERP team is kind of leading, typically you just get a solution architect from that area who elevates to enterprise architect to like look after the cross architecture. But they're not always somebody who actually has experience in the other product. And I think that there is a need more so than ever in the industry for people who really understand the context of each and how to map them together. Because it's difficult. I mean, it's very different, like backgrounds of the products, how they grew up and developed, and how their terminology overlap, but not being the same thing. So I think more so than ever, having that skill is super valuable to be able to know kind of high level how they both work.
Yeah, I agree. It's been an interesting journey to work on multi-projects.
Yeah. It was cool too to see kind of the shifts at Microsoft. Like the fast track teams used to be completely separate, the CRM fast track team and the ERP fast track team, and now they're all together, like mixed, which has been really interesting to see because it forces us as Microsoft to be able to present a more unified approach to implementation as well.
We talk about that too. It's like when you're implementing like two different software, whether it's CRM and an ERP together to a client, the client looks at you as one team.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, well, I don't really care what team you're on. Like we want this business process to be solved.
Right.
So therefore, this is what we're trying to do to solve it. Not so much like, oh, you're siloed here, you're siloed here. So
yeah. Which
I think
is
it's cool.
why the business process catalog and the business process guides initiative is awesome. So that was a project I was working on with Rachel when I was at Fast Track. It's still going on. I'm just not as involved anymore because I'm in marketing. But the intent behind that was just that businesses don't really like 100% care what technology does their process. They just want to be able to do their process, and they want to do it better for more outcomes, right? So the business process catalog approach is actually just what do businesses do? Start there, and then what are the architectural patterns that you can have, and why would you choose one versus the other? So being able to say, okay, we have prospect to quote, and actually some of that could live in ERP and some of that could live in CRM, and the percentage could vary, and this is why and when and how you make that decision, and here's examples. And that is like the long-term vision of the business process guides initiative, or the process catalog initiative, is to be able to start with business process and business language first, and then back into this is how you, for this scenario, should appropriately set up your technological landscape. And I think that is a really good transition to be making.
No, you're good. More. I was just going to say, I agree. More business focused, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
We're building it for the businesses. We want it all to make sense.
100%.
All right. I know we're already over on time,
Oh,
Yeah.
are we?
but
What's
I could
so
keep
fast?
talking to you for like 3 more hours. I know where to find you at your Microsoft booth, so you
Yeah.
keep an eye out.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more. But just to close it out, we have our signature question.
Okay.
What is your favorite hot dish food?
Do you know what a hot dish is?
I do not know what a hot
Well, where are you from?
Boston?
Okay, that explains it. So it's the Minnesota Midwestern term for a casserole. So anything
Oh.
baked in the oven.
Okay. Ham and green bean casserole. It is like white cheddar mac and cheese with ham steak and green beans in it.
Oh.
That's
Yes.
not what I was expecting, but I want to
With
eat that.
homemade like white cheddar cheese sauce, like delicious. So that one is one, and then there's 2. And then there's this other one called Martha's Company casserole, which was like this random recipe that my family just got very attached to. It is like ground beef in like a tomato-based sauce, ricotta cheese, green peppers, green onions, egg noodles, and a shit ton of butter. Sorry, a lot of butter.
We can swear. It's
We can swear.
Okay,
It's
okay, cool. Yeah, so those are both of those are 2, because I have 4 siblings, so our family did a lot of casseroles growing
Yep.
up, like lots and lots of that, because it goes a long way. So those are my 2 favorites.
Can you send us recipe links
Yes.
for
Those
those?
both
100%.
sound great.
I know.
Yeah, and I like green beans, and that green bean casserole sounds way better than
It's so easy to
Or
make.
mushroom
yeah,
soup, yeah.
yes.
Ooh, yeah.
That's how we make it.
Okay, yeah, I'll send it to you. I'd be happy to.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us, and we appreciate you taking time out of the insanely busy DynamicsCon schedule.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
And yeah, well, thanks to our listeners too, and hope you enjoy the rest of your event.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks for tuning in to Dynamics Hot Dish, your go-to podcast for all things Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. If you found this episode helpful, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to follow us on social media for even more insights and updates on the latest trends and best practices in business applications and low-code development. We'll be back soon with another delicious serving of Dynamics and Power Platform goodness. Until then, keep innovating and building great solutions.